Okay, so welcome everybody. And as Kim said, we are going to be looking at some records that have been submitted as part of the project. We're going to do a little bit of a recap about what is required to make a good record. And then we're going to have a bit of fun, hopefully. This is a bit of an interactive evening. I have great fun in creating quizzes and games, and we're going to try this out. You're all going to be a little bit of guinea pigs with me in trying out some games that I've come up with. So let's get into it. So Kim's already given us a bit of an overview background on the project, and I wanted to again share some progress. If you are able to access iRecord, unfortunately, it seems iRecord's down this evening, which is a bit of a shame because we can't go directly into it. But hopefully we'll back up very soon. But luckily, I took a screenshot of the activity page, the 100 Plants 2026 Challenge page before. Actually, I took this yesterday. And here's the summary of the activity so far. You can see the map is looking very blue, dots everywhere, dots in Shetland, dots in Guernsey, dots all over Ireland, and only a few little gaps. So if anybody is going to visit any of those little areas where there's some gaps, there's some opportunities to fill those spaces up and make our UK and Ireland, Britain and Ireland map look even more blue than it already does. But those blue dots are representing 30,468 records, which is absolutely phenomenal. We say this every week, I think, when we update on the progress, that we are so amazed at how many people are getting involved, and it's absolutely fantastic. 942 recorders. And if you are on the 100 Plants mailing list, you would have received an email last week from me where I was adding an additional challenge to see if by the end of May we could actually get 1,000 people recording at least one record on this activity on iRecord. And I think since that email, I think we've added another 20 people who have submitted at least one record. So that's wonderful. So maybe we'll reach 1,000 by the end of May. That'll be wonderful too. So yes, 1,114 species as well recorded, and that is going every day. Some of you have already achieved the 100 plants goal, and if you have, you can obviously see all your records within iRecord when the website is up and running. And if you've got 100 plants there already, 100 different plants, please do email us on training@bsbi.org. And there is a special certificate waiting for you. We'll send that over. We had our first request in today, which is fantastic. And I think 35 people have got 100 plants already or more. So keep going. And we've got some additional new and exciting challenges for those who've already met 100 plants. Obviously, keep going to 200, 300, and so forth. But we will be communicating some other fun ideas for you there too. But do email us about your certificate if you've reached that milestone. And congratulations if you have. That is another fantastic achievement. So what we're going to cover today is, as I said, we're going to recap a little bit about what the elements of a record are. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the additional things you can add to your record to make it even more valuable for science and conservation purposes at the end of the day. So things like abundance, phenology, so when it's flowering or not, habitat notes, and there's all sorts of other things you can add. Then we're going to look at some issues with some records and where some problems lurk and some traps that you can fall into when you're submitting a record or you're looking at other records. So we're going to look at some inconsistencies with spatial and time, space and time, and habitat issues. And I'm all going to show you lots of little examples. I've made up these fake records, lots of them, and we're going to have a bit of a play to sort of see if we can figure out where the issues lie with them. So there's the cultivated trap, the common name trap, and the scientific name trap. So I don't think these are real necessary names. I've kind of come up with them to describe what we're talking about, but hopefully it'll become clear as we go along. So this slide you may have seen if you've been following all the webinars. James Harding Morris had this wonderful slide as part of his talk when he was talking about getting started with recording. And we spoke about the 4 W's, the what, which is the correct identification, and many of you doing a fantastic job of IDing your plants. And if you are struggling with any plant to identify, don't forget that there is the helpful email address, beginnerplantid@bsbi.org, that you can email in with a photograph of your plant. And we have some volunteers there who are very keen to help out. We've had some wonderful emails into that already, and lots of people have been supported through that route. Obviously, give it a go first with the field guides and the other guidance that is available to you. There was a whole webinar on the where of the record, so making sure that your location is accurate, making sure you have the grid reference and the actual information about the town or site and so forth where you are, the date when the plant was seen, and then of course who you, the person who is making the record. So that's James's joke that he has there, who the band, but not my joke, I stole it from him. Now, as we said, those are the 4 W's, but you may have spotted, some of you are already using these additional attributes within iRecord, that there can be other things you can answer about your plant. So abundance is one, and this can be very confusing for plants, I think, especially plants like grasses, where you can't really tell an individual, and nobody's going to be asking you to go and count the individual grasses in a grassy field and give you an idea of how many there are. Then there's stage, so that's about whether it's flowering or it's vegetative or fruiting, for example. And then within iRecord, you can add additional comments and additional things in the comments section as well. And also depending on which form you're using, sometimes there is a form, an option to select habitat, and it has a drop-down menu, but I don't think that's possible in the app if you're using the app. So it depends on how you're submitting the record, what you will see as optional attributes. But if there isn't something there, always just use the comments box, and you can type in lots of different things in there to support your record. So things like habitat, the status. So this is really relevant when you are dealing with maybe something that's growing in an urban park, like a tree that's been planted. So please do state whether it's been planted intentionally and put there. Wildflower seed mixes are another challenging one. So if you think if you're recording some plants in a park and it definitely looks like it's been seeded by a wildflower mix, add that to the comments. Then there will be species that maybe are traditionally what we expect garden plants, but they have hopped the fence, they've escaped the garden, and you may be spotting them outside and in different areas. So do see if you can make a statement about that in the comments. And once you get a bit more familiar with using status, there's actually quite a lot of detailed guidance on our website associated with it. But these are the basic ones to start with. And then you could also add interesting things like altitude. So maybe if you're up in a mountain and you're recording a saxifrage or alpine plant up there, maybe you want to add the altitude. Maybe the plant has got some sort of weird disease or something else. Maybe it is mistletoe, for example. It's a semi-parasite or hemiparasite on a tree, and you could record the actual tree species too as the host. So those are things that are in addition to record. So if we look at abundance in a bit more detail, if it's a tree, you can see individuals. You can maybe give an indication of how many there are if it's not too many. You're not in a very big woodland or something. You may be in a parkland and there's a few individuals of your species. So it's usually a count would be for things that are relatively rare. There's only a few of them. If it's a very rare plant, of course, counting how many there are, like orchids and so forth, that's really good. And you could also use ranges. So if you're thinking it's going above 200 plants or 300, you could use a range of 250 to 500, for example, if you don't really know, just to give an estimate. So that's there. And then for many plants like grasses and other things, and if you're in a meadow, you're not going to be wanting to count individual things. You could use something that's known as the DAFOR scale, so DAFOR, which stands for dominant, abundant, frequent, occasional, rare. And there, that table on the screen is giving you a bit of a summary of what that means in terms of percentage cover. And just to be warned, it's very subjective, very broad categories. And it's really you thinking about a site that you're in and what the sort of cover is. If you've walked around and you've had a look at the area and maybe you've spotted lots of something everywhere, then you could use abundant. You very rarely will use dominant. That would be maybe something where you've got a very small site and it's just covered in nettles. That could be something that's very rare to have happening. So I was having a look at how to actually explain this in maybe some other language. It would be nice to show photos, but it's a really difficult thing to actually show in a photo because it depends very much on context. So one thought here was maybe putting it in this way. So dominant could be like this, a sea of colors. So if you have one plant that's dominant, it's just taking over and it's all just one color. Very rare, as we said. Abundant could be like a heavy salt and pepper mix kind of thing. Frequent, a polka dot pattern. Maybe this plant is popping up in the polka dots across your site, regularly spaced more or less. Occasional, maybe you have to go on a bit of a scavenger hunt to find it, if it's there. And rare would be a needle in a haystack, you wouldn't get there. So I don't know if that helps at all for anybody, but it's just another way to sort of think it through. And you will probably see this coming up on the app if you use the app to record on iRecord. It will have, if you put in a plant species, if you selected a plant, it will then have this option coming up under abundance, and you could select one of the appropriate ones that you feel fits best. I think it also has ranges and so forth too. Right. Then the other one was the stage. So I'm going to actually, let me just bring my app up. So I think it's going to be easiest for me to just pop it in there. So I've got my phone linked. I know this is a bit small. I was thinking of stopping the share and resharing, but hopefully this you can see. And those who are familiar with the app, this should be relatively straightforward. If I go into my app, you should be seeing me going into my app on my phone now, the iRecord app. These are my draft records, the ones that I'm still thinking about submitting. This is a wonderful feature of iRecord. You can create draft records that if you're not quite ready to submit them, you have them here, and it might be you out in the field, you pop all your draft records in, you tag your location and your grid reference and everything else like that. And then later on, you can go and confirm your ID or whatever may be the case, and you can then finally upload them. But if I go into my Common Poppy record here, I can see there I've got all the location, the date, the recorder information. There's abundance, as I was talking about there. So you can see there's the Dufour scale. It also then has a range option. So you can select that. How's this at the top there? Oh, yes, you can also counts as well. So it has all options of all sorts of counts that you can play around with that little scale. And then the stage is the other one that we're talking about here. So this is really useful for us to track phenology, and also particularly if in the early part of the year you're starting to see things coming into flower for the first time. That's a wonderful thing to add that is flowering, and it's just started flowering this year, and you can put that in your comments because that really helps with understanding the impacts of climate change and other things like that. If it's not flowering and it's just vegetative, you could put that in there. Or if it's a fern, then you would potentially use sporophyte or gametophyte. So that is just the stage of the plant. Most ferns that you see will be in the sporophyte phase. So that is the technical stuff. If you don't really know your ferns, don't worry. But if you do, that should hopefully be clear. And I've put on the screen, which isn't an option there, dead. You can record dead plants too, if you can identify them. So there is an option, you can put that in the comments if you wanted to. Most people are recording live plants, so it's probably not going to come up too often. So that is then, I think, the main attributes that are possible within the forms. I think there's also sex on the app. You would have seen you can select sex. So if your plant has male plants and female plants, this is not a very common strategy in many plants that you come across, though red campion, for example, has male plants and female plants. And I think ash trees also have a similar thing. So there'll be lots of species that do have it. So in those cases, you can record the sex. But habitat, you may need to record in the comments if you're using the app. I think if you're using the online form through the website, there is a habitat option and a drop-down menu. But if you want to record habitat, you can go as detailed as you want. Really sort of maybe state what you think the habitat is if you have knowledge of that information. So woodland is great if you want to put woodland, but even better is, let's say, if it's a wet woodland or something else like that, or if it's a beach woodland, that can be very useful additional information. Okay, so those are the additional attributes. And if you go and add those to your 4Ws as your record, then you are making those records extra valuable for research and conservation purposes and mapping purposes and answering all sorts of scientific questions as we go along. Now, what many people have been asking, what does happen to your records once you have submitted them to iRecord? Now, there is a verification process, which can be patchy depending on where you are. And we always want to highlight to everybody that the verification process is undertaken by volunteers who are experts in their area. They are juggling lots of other commitments and demands in their time. So they all will approach verification in slightly different ways. Some may only verify records on iRecord in December time, once a year. Some are on it and they are verifying things all the time. And sort of feeding back. So it is the unfortunate reality of how things work in terms of the natural history world, that we rely on volunteers to help us move records through, as obviously we're relying on volunteers to record. But if we understand that process, and then we can sort of see when it does happen and how it happens. But BSBI is always keen to recruit and support the key people who are verifying records, who are fundamental to the whole process of understanding our plants in Britain and Ireland. So once verification takes place, the records end up in the BSBI's distribution database. And 2 weeks ago, we had a webinar all about the tools that you can access on the BSBI's website, which includes our distribution database, an amazing mapping tool which you can then have a look at and analyze records that have been submitted in the past. And you can see where things have been recorded, where things are missing or haven't been recorded yet, where the gaps are, and so many other questions can be answered there. So if you haven't yet had a chance to check out those resources from the webinar that we had 2 weeks ago, please do. And there's a wonderful new one, which I was very excited about, the plants local to you. So you can use a tool therein where you can actually type in your postcode and it will come up with all the plants that have been recorded since 2010 in your patch. And that can help you maybe hunt for plants that you haven't yet seen. It can help you sort of understand what has been recorded recently in your area and what hasn't, of course. So it's a really nice little tool to play around with and sort of get to know your patch better, and also see if you can fill some gaps. It's an additional challenge there. And then from our database, the records will go to all sorts of different places, fundamentally for research, publications, conservation, and land management. So the Plant Atlas 2020, which we have been signposting throughout, I think, a wonderful website resource for looking at the distribution of plants in Britain and Ireland, and the Red List that we do for Great Britain and other areas, and the floras that are written for different counties. All of that is based on data from the distribution database, and those all those in. So that's just a broad summary of where things go. Okay, so let's now start getting into a little bit of an activity for you all to have a look. And I'm going to be asking a little bit of rhetorical questions, and you can think and answer. Maybe you want to type your answers in the chat or the Q&A, whatever, or just answer them to yourself at this stage. Later on, we're going to have some active polls where you're going to be able to vote answers through. But to start with, if you have a look at our map, this is the same map of all the blue records that we have as part of the 100 Plants activity. And I want you to have a think, can you spot any records that maybe there's a bit of a problem with them? You may have potentially spotted a few floating around in the sea, there to sort of near Newcastle. I think those ones have had a bit of a problem with their grid reference entry. So for you to check your records, when you go to iRecord on the website, when it's working, you can go to the Explore heading. So you log into your account on iRecord and you go to the Explore area, and then you select My Records, will be one of the options in the drop-down menu. And depending on whether you are also recording other species groups, you may well be doing that. It will show you all the records on a map, all your records that you have recorded ever on a map. And if you are wanting to only look at your plant records or any records, you then be able to just check that all your blue dots are where you think they should be. And maybe just check that there's none floating in the sea. That would be a good point. So you can also check any records that you submitted to the 100 Plants activity by going to the activity itself. I wish I could demonstrate it tonight, but I'm unable because the website's down. But if you go to activities and then you select the 100 Plants activity in there, you will then see options to see all the records that have been submitted as part of that activity. And is it up? Yes, it's up and running. Okay, that's wonderful to know. So let's see if we can go and do that quickly. So let's get into iRecord. So it's back in action. That's a little thing. Okay, so here we go. So there's the 100 Plant Challenge. Is this showing up? It is showing up okay, Kim? Yep, good. Okay, so you could go to explore the activity records. Let's see if it's even going to work. It's still got a bit of an error there, but maybe it will be working. Oh, there's all the records. And you can probably see there's a few other ones floating about in the sea. There's one over there by New Zealand, off the coast of New Zealand. So if your records, do have a look, and maybe you want to do a recheck of your grid reference or location information. So here, if you're in that, you will see all the records. But then if you want to just type in your own, or only want to see your own records that have been submitted, you just type in your name under Recorder tab, and then we will see all of your own records appearing that have been submitted to the challenge. This way, if you are submitting records for all sorts of other groups, maybe you're submitting butterflies and bees and everything else, this will filter out only the plant records that you've submitted so far. So there you go. And then you can have a look at your records. You can actually go into an individual record and view it, and you can double check that you are happy. And obviously, this one's been verified, so I can't change it anymore. But that was because hopefully it was correct. What did he say? Except it's correct. Yay. So there is my Crepus vesicaria, a very irritating little hawk's beard. That was fun to identify. Okay, so there we go. So there is the ways you can do it. And then this was the other way, explore my records. And in there, you would then see all of your records for all species that you're submitting, not just the plants. But you could filter it by plants by going to species group and typing in flowering plant or fern or whatever, and saying that, and then it will filter out only the flowering plants. You can do the same for whatever other group you want to do. That looks like it's hanging a bit on that one, but hopefully that has answered that question. Wonderful, it came up just in time for us to be able to demo that. But okay, now the other thing that can go wrong with records is potentially this. We sometimes get lots of records suddenly located in the pub or the nearby pub of a town, or maybe they're located in someone's study. So I just made up this little fun map showing all the blue dots in the pub. So this can happen if you are out and about, and maybe you've just written down your records or you've taken photographs, and at the end of your walk you go to the pub and you sit down and you've wanted to sort them out, and then you start uploading them to iRecord, and then you forget that the GPS on your phone is actually locating them all in the pub. And not where you actually saw them. So do watch out for that. It can happen and does happen quite a lot, actually. So best probably practice, if you want to try and avoid that, is if you're in the field, even if you don't know what the plant exactly is, maybe just upload your photos if you've taken any, or at least add what you think it is, and then it will create a draft record and it will log the location you were at when you were in the field. So that will then be correct, and then you can fix all that, any other information about that record later on. Okay, oh, now this was an interesting bit of information with these records. So this is a playing field, as you can see from the aerial photograph. The little red square is a 10 by 10 meter area. The little red pinny thing in the middle is representing a 1 by 1 meter square. So in terms of grid reference mode, that would be a 10-digit grid reference. So you've got 10 numbers and 2 letters. So that represents 1 square meter. Now, the records for that 1 square meter, there were actually 125 plant species recorded in that little 1 meter squared in that playing field, including lots of tree species and things like floating sweetgrass. So don't know what happened there, but we think maybe someone selected a center, the middle of a square, and put the highest resolution down, and then all the records are suddenly at that one little point. So you can see why that's potentially problematic, because definitely weren't there. So it's just to be careful of what's going on there if you've suddenly seen all your records going into that one little spot. Very unlikely diverse playing field area. Right, so here we're going to now go with some fake records. We're going to just have a think about them. So this record was rejected, status rejected. The picture that I've put there is actually just to show you what this plant looks like in real life. No photo was actually provided associated with this record, this fake record that I've made up. So we're going to imagine now we're going to look at this and we want to sort of see what the problem is. So they've said it's a species, sundew, a species of sundew, Drosera tundifolia. They've put the location there with a grid reference on a chalk downland nature reserve. Now that grid reference looks a little dodgy in itself, so there's something going on there. The date is July, which seems okay. But then it says in the comments, growing in a very dry, thin soil on a south-facing slope. Now, the verifier will know that sundews need to be growing in pretty wet, acidic, boggy, peat environments. So there is almost no chance that it would be growing in that environment that has been described there. So whatever happened with this one, there is an issue. So there's a habitat inconsistency. So what might happen is that one could be rejected straight away, and you would then have a look and see, oh, actually, oops, I put the wrong comment for that record, or whatever may be the case that has resulted in that. So that is a habitat inconsistency example. But it's a beautiful plant, if you did see it. This one was flagged for review. A wood anemone in November, local nature reserve, no photo provided. Anybody spot the problem? So if anybody, I assume most of you know that we've just had a period in most parts of Britain Island where wood anemones would have been out and about in full flower in springtime. Very rare for them to be flowering in November. So there's a date issue there, a time temporal outlier. So that would be flagged to be checked what's going on and why. This is a ghost orchid now, extremely rare plant. Only a few known locations for this. And if someone sends in this record to our record and they put a 10-kilometer precision grid reference for ghost orchid, I'm not sure any verifier is going to easily be able to accept that, because that pretty much doesn't help much in terms of anything. You would then need to have someone to go and check and verify for such a rare plant that actually was in the location to find it out. So someone might have put this at a high resolution to make sure that it the location was protected, and then hopefully they would then contact somebody at BSBI to tell us that you spotted a ghost orchid, and then there would be lots of excitement, and then they'd be able to go and visit the sites. But these are usually very rare and protected sites that don't go to the public, so that could be a precision error or a sensitive record that was so set as such. Okay, here's another fake one. Sea holly. There's a grid reference in Derby city centre. So there's the map, the pin, and then the locality description, which is the second part of the where of a record. It says Brighton Beach. So straight away, there's obviously a problem with the grid reference. Likely to be Brighton Beach, but definitely not in Derby City Centre. So that would be flagged as an issue. Sometimes recorders want to be anonymous in their records, and they use pseudonyms or names like these. If that does happen, and then they were submitting a very rare record like this red helleborine, you see on the top right, I've got a map that shows the historical distribution of the species. So extremely rare. And a record from an anonymous source going into our record is not going to be accepted. This would have to be checked and the site checked and everything else like that to see if that's actually happened. And that would be very difficult to do if the person was anonymous, because you wouldn't be able to get in touch with them. So unfortunately, if that was a real sighting, that would be a lost opportunity to be able to figure out where that plant is growing. This one is about duplicates. So we've had lots of questions about how often do I record the same species? And especially when you're starting out, it can be like, well, okay, there's a daisy, there's a daisy, there's a daisy. And at what point do you record a daisy? And then you say, okay, I've recorded a daisy now. Uh, and I think the guidance varies a little bit, but I think ideally, common species like daisies, maybe record them once a year, but also in a sort of at monad level, so once every square kilometer potentially. So if you're in 1 kilometer square and you want to record another daisy, potentially ideally do it in another kilometer away from that site. You could do it in different sites as well, but 50 records in the same small square, let's say a 10 by 10 meter square or 100 by 100 meter square, is probably not going to be very useful use of anybody's time. So just be aware of that. Lookalikes. So here we go. I took some buttercups this afternoon, growing side by side. So this is photos of the flower from the top. They do look slightly different, but very similar. Not going to be able to tell. So if you submitted a photo like this with your record, and that was it, then the verifier would probably not be able to check that you had accurately identified the plant. You haven't provided sufficient evidence in your record. So what you could probably hopefully do is add a picture of the flower stalk. So this then will help you work through which species you actually got. So you'll see in this one here on the right-hand side, it's got a grooved flower stalk, and that one has a smooth flower stalk. And then even better, you could have some pictures of the leaves. So this leaf of this plant goes here together. You can see that this little extra bit of the leaf stalk is elongated, whereas it's not. And here you've got at least 3 to 5 lobes that are coming out with not this long one here. There's no long extra stalk like there is there. So with those additional information, that additional evidence, it would be very clear which of these 2 very common buttercups you may have and you have recorded. So meadow buttercup would have a smooth flower stalk, and creeping buttercup would have a grooved flower stalk, and in this very diagnostic leaf shape. So oftentimes there's quite a lot of plants that look very similar, and in order to make sure that they are accurately verified and the evidence is there to support the species that you've got, try and make sure you've got the diagnostic photo there. And I think our webinar a long time ago went into a lot of detail about taking photos for your records. And many of you have actually been doing amazing with the photographs. There's wonderful, wonderful records documenting the diagnostic features as part of this project. So thank you for doing that. That is really, really nice to see. Okay, and here we go. We've got the cultivated trap. So this can be tricky and working out whether something is cultivated or wild. Obviously, we're all after wild plants. We're not after any garden plants or anything else like that. So someone's put in a record for daffodil, and they've said it's the native daffodil species, and the record was rejected because it's clear from the description that it was probably a planted patch of cultivars of daffodils that have been planted outside a school in rows, and the bulbs have been planted potentially even by school children and so forth. So no photos were provided. So that unfortunately would probably be rejected because cultivated daffodils is not of that much interest in terms of the records for wild species of and it's an entirely different species to the wild daffodil anyway. And then this one is just an interesting one just to be aware of, and this can come up and trip up lots of people, especially in the beginning when you don't really know what the scientific name is for a particular species, but it's always good to double check because iRecord will come up with suggestions when you type in the common name. So, for example, stonecrop. If you type in stonecrop, and there are lots of garden escapes of these that will be out and about and quite abundant in different places, and it's good to record them. So Sedum spurium, this one here, definitely good to record it outside of the garden context, of course, outside of the planted context. But if you type in stonecrop into iRecord, the first thing that comes up is Sedum sapere, which is actually an extremely rare plant and very unlikely to be the one that you're wanting. It's also sometimes called pink stonecrop, which has got a similar name to this one, common name. So it's very confusing. And it is unfortunate that iRecord does that and doesn't really bring this one up. The other confusing thing is that the name has recently changed as well. So in the scientific name has changed. So that's just a pain. But you can see this map is just showing all the records of this Sedum sapere, which have had to be rejected in the database because they were not this rare species. I think there's very few records, maybe a few in Buckinghamshire of this species, whereas most of them should be Sedum spurium. So that's a tricky one, but it is a bit of a trap sometimes. Not very common, but it can happen. And then on the other side of the coin, you can have a scientific name trap. And this is very unfortunate. Whoever decided to name these two very different plants in such a similar way. So we've got Euphorbia peplis and Euphorbia peplis, one with an I and one with a U. And one is extremely rare, actually extinct. So you can see here, this is its distribution map from the atlas. And you can see little dots around the coast of Cornwall. Historically, nothing recent. I don't think it's been recorded since 1976, according to the atlas. I don't know if that might have changed, but there's a picture of it. And then there's this thing that grows everywhere, pretty much in your garden, on stone, everywhere, all the rest. And oftentimes, when people are trying to record this one, they may select Peplis. And these are all the records in the database where Peplis has been selected when actually they meant Peplis with a U. So that's just terrible in terms of whoever thought up that scientific name and made them so similar. But it's a very, very common error. So do be careful when you are recording your petty spurge. Make sure it's with a U. Right. Okay, so now we're going to have a few polls coming up. So let's see. This is a game I've called it a detailed detective quiz. You may have better names for it. If you can come up with a better name for me, I would be appreciative. But we're going to have a go now. And hopefully what will appear on your screen will be some questions. So I've got the question on the slide, but I'm also now going to start a poll. So let's have a look. This is going to work. And you should be able to see the poll appearing on your screen. And hopefully you can also move the screen around. So if you select next to where it says polls and quizzes with your mouse or your finger, whatever you're using, you can move it out of the way so that you can read the question on the slide a bit better, but it is in the actual poll itself. So have a go at voting on which answer you reckon is the appropriate one. We'll have a look. So Meadow Buttercup, which we saw earlier, it's submitted in a site, heavily shaded salt marsh environment. And got people voting. Give you a second, so it's great. Okay, so Right. And there, we'll reveal the results, share the results. This is what everybody voted. Hopefully that's coming up for you to see some results. So most of you said ecological inconsistency, which is wonderful. Yes, that's the correct answer because meadow buttercup is very unlikely to ever be recorded in a salt marsh environment. I don't think it can survive in that environment very well. It's a grassland species. Even if you had photographic evidence, that would be an interesting one. Some of the people answered that one. If you had evidence of meadow buttercup growing in a salt marsh environment, I think we would all be very interested because this would be a very strange occurrence. There'd be something interesting, amazing about that meadow buttercup. So yeah, okay. So that's our first quiz. So let's have a look. We've got that to the second one now. So second quiz question should be appearing, and there is this background slide. Okay, so a record is submitted with a location name back garden. Why is this potentially problematic? I think they would have had maybe they had the grid reference, but then they just said back garden. You may think that that's okay, but if you remember that the reason we have two parts to the location information or the where of a record, we have the grid reference and we need the location is so that we can independently verify that both of those are correct. So if someone puts a perfect grid reference, but then they just say back garden, then that's very vague, way too vague, and we cannot independently verify the grid reference is correct. So yes, end poll and share results. Most of you got that correct. So vague locality description. Okay, so let's go. Oh, where did I go now?
Chantal, just on that, would you just explain what private property restriction might mean?
Well, I think that is a bit more of a made-up answer in terms of being necessarily a real-life one. But potentially there could be some sort of issues with access and that sort of thing. But I don't know whether that would ever come up within a record situation. So someone may not want to say back garden, particularly if you don't want to clarify it's your back garden because it's going to be linking with your name and that sort of thing as well. So you probably want to avoid doing that. All right, so what is happening? Am I sharing? Stop sharing number 2. All right, so question 3. Launching question 3. Oops. This one's about sycamore. Okay, so record identifies sycamore as a field maple but provides a clear photo. Why is this correctable? So that's the photo that they recorded, for example, and added, but they said it was field maple when the photo clearly says it is sycamore. Easy to do. Yeah, the evidence and the answer here, as many of you are saying, the evidence allows for redeterminations. This is the idea that the person who's verifying and checking can actually give a suggestion that maybe you want to change the species name for this record. So that can be a useful change. So ending that poll, share results, and yeah, D was the answer. Evidence allows for redetermination. So this is why having lots of additional evidence associated with your record is extremely useful because then the record doesn't just get lost and it can be used with a bit of modification if needed. So we've got 2 more questions in this section. So number 4. So here we've got an expert submitting lots and lots of records using a bulk upload. So CSV is a type of spreadsheet, but they've uploaded to a database of software or so forth. And the verified notices the date is all weird. Every single record is 01/01/1900. And what has happened? Those of you who may be familiar with using software may know that, Excel particularly, that the date format in Excel uses the number of days since, I think, this year. And it can become corrupted in some ways, and suddenly the date has all gone funny. So yeah, so historical archive error is potentially an issue, but it's very more likely to be the software Excel data corruption problem. And this used to happen quite a lot before with people collecting data in spreadsheets, but not so much anymore, I think. Okay, so that was the results from that one. Just have you got that one? Okay, then let's have a look what the next one has installed. Ah, this is an interesting one. So saltwort. So again, I've provided the picture from our atlas. All these pictures are from the plant atlas of what the plant looks like. And this one has been recorded from the site 100 miles inland from on a roadside verge. Why might a verify accept it, despite the fact that this is a plant that would normally grow on the coast in very salty environments? And most of you have already got this one sussed, and there's lots of plants actually that fall into this category that are now spreading inland along our roads because of salt spreading. So Danish scurvy grass, which has kind of just gone over now, has also been one of those. You'll see that little white flowers in the late spring all along road verges. So yes. C. So halophytic means it loves salt and likes to grow in salt. So great stuff. So verifiers will be aware of that, of course. Okie dokie. And the last one in this section, let's launch that one. Number 6. So this is a grid reference question, which if you attended the mapping and grid reference webinar, you would have already seen this one. It's just a little sort of trick in terms of making sure that we can read grid references. And if we want to reduce the resolution of a grid reference from 8-figure to a 6-figure grid reference, and if this is all, you have no clue what we're talking about here, and you want to find out, we went into a lot of detail about this in the mapping and grid reference webinar. It just sort of gives you a quick way of modifying the resolution of the record, which can be useful. If you remember our 1 meter square little patch where everything was being recorded, if you just reduce the resolution to each of those records, it probably would have helped a lot. So the answer, yes, is B. So excellent. So go. So that is the end of those ones. Now, one last, a little bit of a game as we finish the evening is, I want you to imagine you are checking records and you can decide whether they should be accepted or rejected. So there will be a bunch of questions coming up in one go. Accept or reject, you're going to probably have to move the poll question thing around so that you can see the question on the slide, because it's not going to be in the poll in the same way as it was in those other ones. So here we go. Let's have a look. So the first one, accept or reject. So there is a fake record. Make your decision. So remember, rejection doesn't mean that the plant wasn't there or that we don't believe you, just means that there isn't sufficient evidence to prove that it was.
Shall we read the question out? Will that make that
Yes.
easier?
Yep, go for it.
So
Yeah, you
Common
can do it.
dandelion, a photo of a sharp close-up of the yellow flower head only. The comment is found in my back garden lawn, and the location is a high-precision GPS in a suburban area. Do we want to accept or reject that?
Okay, so I think we'll talk about the answers, though I'm not going to reveal them. Not everybody's answered. Okay, so some of you wanted to reject that one. Actually, it's a accept because it's a very common species. Dandelion, if you put just that, very common, they grow everywhere. There's a good photo of the flower and good resolution in terms of location. So that would be an exception, accept. How about this one? Common nettle. No photo provided. The person says stung their leg through their trouser. Definitely nettles. Public footpath. Accept or reject? What do you reckon? So this is going to be similar to the first one in that we will accept it because again, nettle very common. It pretty much goes everywhere, and we're going to accept that someone stung their leg with a nettle. That's probably nettles, and a photo wouldn't be entirely necessary. So lots of very common species will be accepted with less information. So don't always need to have a photograph, though we obviously recommend having a photo. But if you can't get a photograph of something and maybe the photo that you need is a tiny hair or something like that, what you can do for those circumstances, you can actually in your comments just describe how you decided what your species is, what feature you may have used.
So there's just a comment that the poll has disappeared. If anyone, can everyone else see it? If maybe you could pop a message in the chat for us, otherwise we'll have to relaunch the poll. But if you can still see it, if you could just type in the
It's
chat.
probably just hiding behind something. If people would
Okay, people can. Oh, some people can see it, some people can't. So it may be hiding.
Yeah. Pops behind.
Mm.
Oops. So this is the trick with the Zoom polls, that when you put multiple ones in.
If you submitted the poll, it will have disappeared. So at the moment, we're just going to add your answers to it, and then we'll do one submit at the end. So we're going to answer all of
Is that what happens?
That's what's
Okay.
happened, I think. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, but you can play along in the chat if your poll has disappeared.
Yes. Sorry if your polls disappeared. Okay, number 3, accept or reject. Bluebell, a clear photo showing drooping flowers on one side, creamy white anthers and narrow leaves, an ancient woodland indicator, thousands present, verified ancient woodland site location. Would you accept or reject? So this is one, even if there wasn't a photo and they had that description in the comments, that's clearly describing the diagnostic features of the bluebell, Hyacinthioides non-scripta. So that would very likely be accepted. Number 4, accept or reject. Broad-leaved willow herb. You've got an outer focus shot of a small pink flower. The comment is a weed in my vegetable patch, and the location is a private garden. Accept or reject. This is the second last one.
So we're getting
So this
some
one
rejects in the chat.
Rejects in the chat. Yes, we would reject that one because there's lots of different epilobiums. It's a very difficult group to get to grip with which one it is. You get some very common ones and some rarer ones. So you would need much more detailed description or photographs to be able to get it agreed. And the last one, early spider orchid. Excellent macro shots of the labellin and sepals. These are special parts of the flower of the orchid. First time seeing this at this site! Exclamation point. Location 50 miles north of its known current range. Accept or reject. Any suggestions in the chat?
We're on question 5 for those that are answering in the poll. Oh, it's mixed as well. Yes. A couple of votes for accept and a couple for reject.
Okay, so this one is an interesting one because yes, it's a new location outside of its known range, but this one would excite anybody looking at it, especially with the beautiful photograph of showing the key features of the species and the person that has put it up there. So they would follow up on this one. I think there would be quite a follow-up process to check and that it is there. The person's definitely seen it, that maybe even potentially go visit the site necessarily, but it looks like it'd probably be accepted if all of that is double checked. So yeah, there's no chance it would be rejected. Whoa, we need to check that one out. Okay, so that brings us to the end of our little bit of fun and games. So thank you for listening, and just a reminder, general inquiries about the 100 plants is training@bsbi.org, and if you have an ID question, beginner plant ID at bsbi.org. So we've got a little bit of time for questions, if there's anything.
There is one question. A neighbour has set up an iRecord activity for their local village. Is there a way of copying local records from the BSBI 100 Plants Challenge on iRecord onto the other local activity?
What they would best do with their activity is when they put the settings together in iRecord, when they set up the activity, the settings, they should select all records within the defined area, your neighborhood area. And that will bring in any record that is being submitted within a defined time period of the activity and the location, regardless of whether it's been submitted to another activity or not. So that's probably the easiest way to do it. I don't think there's a way to transfer them directly across, but they will show up in the summaries and all that sort of thing if those settings have been made in the background.
Yeah, so that would be the best way for them to edit their local settings. We definitely wouldn't want to put your records in a second time under the other activity because that would be duplication.
Yes. Yeah, definitely don't duplicate them. Yeah, they will be there and then they can pull them into their activity and they can celebrate them as part of the neighborhood too, which is wonderful to see.
Does anybody else have any questions? Oh, we have one here. If a description of the plant includes hollow stems, how do I pick a stem to check this, or do I just squeeze it?
So this would be a good thing to determine whether you've got a grass, sedge, or rush sometimes. So yes, I think if you can break the stem in half and check it looking down, because there could be sort of the pith and all things, other things like that would allow you to bend it and it still wouldn't be hollow. So you probably need to sort of break the stem, but this does depend on which species you're talking about. If it's just a grass and there's tons of it, but if it's a rare plant, there's only one of it, you probably don't have to do that.
Alan asks, I'm still finding abundance difficult. How do you define the size of the site you're using for your definition? It is a tricky one, isn't it? It's kind of
abundance
subjective.
is so tricky and it's so subjective. So I think everyone will have a slightly different way of approaching this probably, but if you're within a defined site, let's say a park or a nature reserve or something like that, then the best way to do that is if you are recording a plant, and let's say you've spotted red campion, for example, and then you have a walk around a bit more before you decide on the abundance. And within the bounds of the site, you can then use that as your sort of estimate of what you think the abundance is within that site boundary. So that's easier. Where you don't have site boundaries, I kind of work on maybe a bit of an estimate of a 100 by 100 meter area. You kind of just have a think in your mind as you've been walking around what you've seen. If you're going along a route, if you're walking along a route and then along your whole route, at the end, think back on how often you've seen that plant and then estimate it more or less in that defined route area. So
I think it would be a good use of the comments box as well to kind of put in a wee note as to what you defined
definitely,
your size set to be.
yeah, that'll help a lot,
Yeah.
certainly.
Another question in, if we okay for time. Um, would you record Taraxacum officinale rather than Taraxacum sp?
So Taraximum officinale ag is the sort of official that it just incorporates all the possible dandelions. So I think that's usually will be accepted. So just go with a Taraxacum officinale. And
Mm.
if there's an ag, I'm not sure what comes up in iRecord. I haven't recorded a dandelion in a while. But if you just put that, that would be the best approach.
Great, thank you. And just to reiterate, we'll put all of the answers to the questions from tonight onto the Padlet, and I'll just pull that
Yes.
link up again. So yes, for the questions, if you didn't catch everything that we said, especially those ones around setting up other activities, we'll make sure we put something on the Padlet for you for that. Is that okay? Great,
Yes, let's make sure we keep up with that. I'm a little bit behind from one of the two of the last webinars. I'm still updating, but yes, it will be there very soon.
great. Well, I think that's all of
That's
our questions. So thank you so much. Chantal, do you want to say anything for
yep.
this, the last in our series at the moment?
Yes, so this is the last webinar in our series. We've had 11 and it's been a wonderful journey with you all. And we do hope to run a few more webinars over the summer or interactive sessions. We're still planning those. And we do also hope to have a celebratory sort of session towards the end in October time. So keep a lookout on the website for updates about that, where we'll then review all the highlights, the overall stats, how many people eventually took part, and also really highlight some of those exciting finds that
Mm.
you're all making. There's been some really, really nice ones. We've had a few press releases about some 100 plants challenges or participants who have spotted things that haven't been recorded in some areas and been making the verifiers very excited. So we'll highlight those as well in more detail.
Yes, absolutely. And do make sure you keep up with the challenge now. Just because we're not here on the webinar every week doesn't mean that you need to stop recording. So please do keep going, and we will I hopefully have some a feedback
Yes.
form going out to you soon so that we know what worked, what didn't, what you'd like to see more of, what you'd like to do next.
Yes, so that's will be coming hopefully around June time. We'll send around a feedback request form, so that'll be wonderful to hear your thoughts. And we will probably be emailing relatively regularly, maybe once a month, just to give you some additional challenges, maybe highlight plants that are out and about and are exciting, and so forth. So hopefully you'll get those as well.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful
Enjoy the
evening.
rest of your. Bye bye.
Bye.